Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for everyone for joining me. It's early here. It's early here in Japan, so if I'm not with it, it's because I just woke up and then switched everything on and then started the stream. So first, thanks to everyone for there are various people for supporting me. One person who, in a way, supported me is Mas Kobo, the guy who runs the company. Lent me a couple of professional microphones. One's there and actually one's in front of the computer, so if I turn around and speak, my voice doesn't disappear. And he very kindly lent me, actually they're hand-built condenser microphones, and he lent me a couple, which is very kind. So that's if you notice my voice sounds a lot better in my videos, that's why. So he makes it. If you saw the Tokyo Headphone Festival report, you'll see he makes the $20,000, actually $20 or $27,000 amp, which he actually makes pro audio gear. Really fascinating guy, and he had hand built pro audio gear, and his microphones are used in studios in Japan. Also, thanks to all my supporters, which I have to say thank you to, who have made it possible for me to continue these reviews. And if you haven't already, you can actually support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Currawong. And even for, as I've always said, for if you ever consider buying me a coffee as thanks, consider becoming a patron for even just a month. And if I have so many thousand followers on YouTube and subscribers, I should say. And if even a fraction of them supported me, it may make these videos more possible. As you can see, all this equipment behind me, which I've left running, uses up a considerable electricity bill. So that covers that very nicely. This morning is a question and answer for about audio gear, and I've got a number of questions here, which my supporters, of course, get first priority. One of the first questions that was asked is, what's your favorite headphone and why? Which is kind of an obvious question. I suppose the headphones I prefer are the ones I bought, which should be both are behind me, I think. Focal Utopias. I don't know how well you can see. Oh, yes, you can see the Focal Utopias behind me. Mezes Empyreans, which are sitting on a hanger under the desk because I don't have enough hangers on the desk to cover everything. They're my two main headphones, and they're the headphones I bought and used. I actually bought the Utopia secondhand after I borrowed a pair from a friend of mine when I did my Utopia review, and I really liked them and decided I wanted a pair. So I hunted around for a secondhand pair and managed to get a pair which arrived smelling of deodorant, someone or aftershave or whatever. So I hung them out. Actually, aftershave is terrible stuff to ever get stuck on headphones. I think it was deodorant kind of smell, so I hung them out for a while and the smell went away. And the Empyreans, I bought the review pair, and I like both of those. And I think I always wanted, like a lot of high-end headphones tend to have a fairly light bass, and if you listen to with headphones that have fairly light bass, then you tend to gear towards certain kinds of music which is more suited to that kind of sound signature. So actually to have I wouldn't call the Empyreans bass strong. I've been listening to the Sony IR Z1R, so that they are bass strong. The Empyreans had that kind of punch in the kind of bass that made them more suitable for listening to a larger variety of music. So sometimes I switch between both, and I've thought of doing a comparison video, and I haven't quite decided what I want to say though. The IEMs I like at the moment. I like the Z1Rs, which you can maybe just see sitting there hanging here. A friend of mine very kindly lent me a pair for review, and he lived in Japan, and he bought a pair, and he said he had a quick listen and sent them over to me, which is really, really kind. They have a lot of bass if you've ever tried a pair, but their bass is so good, I really like it. And it's kind of interesting to me. At the same time I enjoy something, I think, why am I enjoying this? So I actually wish there was a full pair of full-sized headphones that sounded like the IR Z1Rs. The Sony Z1s didn't quite do that. Although they're kind of in that direction, and I still have the Z7s, and similarly sounding Cascades, but none of them have the resolution of the Z1R. So, I wish someone made a pair of headphones like that. Maybe they do, and maybe I haven't tried them because there are other headphones out there I haven't tried. So, I really wish they're so entertaining, and it just makes a huge difference. Actually, speaking of headphones, before I go to the next question, I have these in for review, which are the MySpheres. And these are, if you've heard of the AKG K1000s, which are really famous headphones, they're designed to be speaker-like headphones for your ears. And the guy who made them, he came onto HeadFi one day, and he said, I'm the guy who made the K1000s. And I said, that's really cool. And a lot of people said, you should make them again. And he did. And they're called the MySphere. So they're really fascinating because they kind of tilt out, and they're quite cool. And I'll do a review of those. That'll come up. And I really like them in some ways. I've got the Ether 2s in for review too, which I like in different ways, which is why, probably the thing that delays a review the most is thinking, some days I listen to the Ether 2 and I really like them, and some days I listen to them and I really don't like them. So, got to figure that one out. What qualities of a headphone would you say you find the most important? Would you say the most important, or do you pay the most attention to when you're listening? Well, most of it's frequency response and resolution, I suppose. That's probably the most, because the thing people are interested in the most. And then after, there's comfort as well. For example, the Verum ones, which are floating around here somewhere, they're just off the side. They sound pretty good and the design is pretty clever, but the comfort level is, yeah. Same with the MySpheres. They have a really funny way of sitting on your head, which I can show you. They don't sit normally. They sit at an angle, so they sit like this, and that can be irritating. So that can be an issue, but mainly comes down to frequency response and resolution. And then there are other factors, that which affect how those things will work, whether they scale up from, if I plug them into a cheap amp, plug them into an expensive amp, can I notice the difference? And the more so I notice the difference, it tells me more whether how resolving they are, rather than just focusing on, how can I hear the fine details of guitar plucks in guitar music. It's a faster way of doing so without focusing too hard and becoming bored, which is kind of the troublesome thing with reviewing stuff. Is my character is more, if I become uninterested in something for any reason, it's very hard for me to do stuff. So I have to be interested, which is why, for example, I don't do cheap Chinese IEMs, because I'm not interested. Number 3, question, can top-of-the-line IEMs compete or compare with top-of-the-line full-sized headphones for critical listening? I suppose so, because you're isolating out some degree of noise. In this room, the background sound is, at the moment, 30 dBs. Okay, so it's not going to really make any difference to critical listening, but if the IEMs are extremely resolving, then they can kind of help in picking stuff out, but it's still not going to compare with the fact that you can't hear soundstage properly. There's a lot of stuff you can't make out with IEMs, but some things you can, some things you can't, but most that you can't, I'd say. But if you're listening, like if I've got the M11 Pro in here, and most people are going to listen with IEMs. So, first thing I do, pull out the Andromedas and do a hiss test. And, that's critical, so for critical evaluation at least, that's important. 4, what is the most sub-bass you've ever heard out of a high-end system? Headphones, IEM, speakers included. Oh, well, these Z1Rs are coming close. Headphones. Probably, maybe, I guess, planers. Most planers can do pretty good sub bass. The most, actually, in quantity, the most impressive bass I ever heard, I didn't hear it, I didn't do a full orchestral thing, was out of an avant-garde horn system, which has these huge subwoofers that go with it. That was the most impressive I remember, just overall. I did play something, I don't know if it had sub bass. But yeah, sub bass, it's just, is about displacement. So in the speaker system, of course someone is going to, maybe the most sub bass was someone's car stereo setup where they put in gigantic subwoofers and turn it right up. Number 6, how much could you get out of the D300 reference, which is the streamer behind me, versus your PC Mac Mini to iUSB to DAC? That's really hard to say how much. You can't give a quantity on these things. I haven't done the review of the streamer yet. I should. It mainly goes into the Hugo 2, which has a generally fairly sensitive to, in my opinion, coaxial input. And of course, a good optical cable will probably cover all the issues that are normally fixed by good coax. But it was interesting trying the different things with it, using the iUSB setup to a converter versus using a D300 reference versus using, I still have the Kitsune hollow spring thing, SU1, upgraded SU1, and the D300 Ref 1 by just a bit. But it was interesting. Those things are a bit of a quagmire, and people want me to do streamers, and that's, well, I'd have to find companies that are going to willing to lend me streamers, which is a little bit tricky. But a lot of DACs now have USB or inputs that are so good that they should be unnecessary. But then other people come along and say, no, still I got better results using XYZ streamer using something which had excellent USB. It's one of those terrible things which is an absolute pain in the butt. And I kind of, again, I'm not sure I have the enthusiasm to start really connecting doing a lot of this stuff, and then paying attention to super fine details of how music sounds. But there was seemed to be as I go up the scale of better transports, seemed to be an increasing scale of lack of anything harsh or unpleasant from the music. So that's probably the best description I can give. Number 7 was an interesting question, completely different. What creates instrument body? And I think this is referring to the sound. I'd say the lower mids and upper bass, or maybe mid bass too, that area, from the lower mids down, the amount of that gives some degree of instrument body. If it's a bit on the thin side with some headphones, like they have a big drop in the mid bass or lower mids, it can sound thin. Same with vocals. How a performer can sound will change depending on the frequency response. So I guess we can say body. It feels like you feel the instrument more if you've got the lower registers of the instrument playing a bit stronger. That's my thought anyway. Okay, now let's see. Someone else just asked a question. One of my new supporters asked, here's a slightly different question. There may be some variance between DAPs, but at this level, I think we're talking about the M11 here, M11 Pro. How much difference does it make compared to the headphones IEMs you are listening with? Say you plug in a pair of Andromedas to the M11 and a pair of FH5s to the M11 Pro, which combination would you pick? Or you plug in a pair of Solaris into an LG phone. I don't have LG phones, but oh well. Would you pick that over the M11 Pro FH5? This is going to be really tricky. So, a pair of Andromedas to the M11 and a pair of FH5s to the M11. That's kind of... Andromedas and FH5 sound totally different, so it would depend on the music I'm listening to, I reckon. This is one of the things that gets tricky in doing reviews, is you say, oh, okay, so obviously the M11 Pro is going to sound a little bit better than the M11. But the question is, maybe it sounds, if I plug in Z1Rs, of course it's going to sound, I'm going to hear that a little bit better. If I plug in Andromedas, probably as well. I haven't tried the Andromedas yet, only for hiss testing, really. Let's say, I'll do this in the review too. So we have a scale. Crappy music, excellent music. So crappy music, crappily recorded music, okay. My example being Van Halen. I love Van Halen, but holy cow, I wish they'd use a real studio, not the one, their own studio. Because there's an excellent song, I forgot the name of it, which I really liked, but because it was recorded in their studio, the dynamics are really crap. It just sounds flat and dead, like someone playing across the other side of a field without any speakers. It's just so disappointed. And then really well recorded music, you've got Decca Masters, you've got Chesky Binaural, native DSD, etc., all that kind of stuff. So if I'm listening to Van Halen, having a difference between an M11 and an M11 Pro, there's going to be no difference. If I'm listening to a Decca Master, yes, there will be, which is what I used to test. The other scale of things is, okay, people who are upgraded, who are decided to buy a DAP, starting with who have never ever owned anything more exciting than a phone and a pair of earbuds, versus a DAP and earphones, I should say, versus people like me who have heard not everything, but even high-end systems. How you rate the differences will depend on that, and so it will depend on the music quality and kind of what you're used to and what your expectations are as well. So people who are really into the hobby will go, oh, I guess we went from my M11 to the M11 Pro and it sounds so much better. Whereas people are just into it, it's like, I can't really hear a difference. And if they might be listening to some modern compressed pop where you can't really hear the difference anyway. So depending on the earphones, that adds a third factor as to what you're listening with. If I'm listening, you wouldn't plug earbuds into an M11 Pro. That'd be kind of silly. But you might, if you think, oh, is the M11 Pro going to be better? I have a pair of $1,000 plus IEMs, or maybe even less than that now. I don't know how. The cheapest, most resolving IEMs, maybe FH7s, possibly at a guess. Then you might be worth that extra bit of resolution, and you're listening to good music. So you've got three factors in there: expectation, music quality, and what you're plugging into it. So it's kind of tricky. And it's also, but would I prefer listening to FH5s versus Andromedas? Well, it depends on the music I like. If I'm listening to like very generic random music, which I want the bass kick, I might listen with FH5s, and how loud I listen too. So I don't listen that loud, and if you listen loud, you don't want very bright IEMs as well. So it's very kind of tricky. Any advice on the Audio GD R2R11 versus NFB11 2.8 for a DAC? Well, it's simple. The bigger thing has better performance. It has biggest power supply and has better performance. It's the same with sheet audio and just about everything else. Although, just about everything else, because there are a few, you have the kind of unicorn tech like Chord the situation's very different there. But it depends, again, spend what is suitable for you. And the law of diminishing returns and a lot of these products is, depending on the manufacturer, probably once you get over about $400 or $500, the law of diminishing returns really kicks in hard. So if you think a combined product, say from Audio GD, which has a DAC amp in there, is about $800, well, then you've hit the point where the law of diminishing returns kicks in, and then the difference between that and the big ugly full-size components starts to become quite small. But it depends on the headphones to a degree. So that's kind of thing. So for an individual component, a DAC or an amp, above $400 or $500, the amount you spend to get the same amount of performance decrease, you have to spend a lot more to get a little bit more performance increase. That's what I think at the moment anyway. So that's my advice. And one more comment I will make, and then I'm going to go. This whole measure thing is mostly rubbish. I'll just give you an analogy that came to my mind. Let's say I was a car tester and I went and dynoed a whole bunch of cars and then put up graphs about which ones dynoed the best, and then drove them around the block briefly and then gave my commentary on the performance. What would you say? Okay, you'd say, you're an idiot. Dyno doesn't relate to real-world testing. Neither do measurements. Music is not sweeps and tones. The difference between understanding what you're looking at in measurements were for manufacturers to check that stuff is performing correctly, that there are no stuff that channels are balanced, that there are nothing bad happening in the circuit that shouldn't be happening. If you get a frequency response of a circuit for essentially is other than flat down to a fraction of a dB, then something is grossly wrong in the circuit. Most of that is what the testing was for. Digital is a whole quagmire I won't even get into. It would take me another hour to even just scratch the surface. That's what testing is for. Measuring it's got this, doing a graph with a whole bunch of, this has got an output impedance of 1 ohm and this stuff has got down to 0.1 ohm, it means nothing. Okay, the M11 Pro has 2.4 ohms output impedance, and for 99.99% of people, it'll make no difference. Okay, it doesn't. There's one measurement which is interestingly and useful, and that's the crosstalk measurement. That one will actually tell you something. Most of the others will tell you nothing unless there's anything really grossly wrong in the measurement of a product. And probably the edge of that, I would probably say, is the MODI multi-bit. And but I mean, people buy non-oversampling DACs, which measure terribly, but people like that kind of. I say it like an objectivist will say it, like that kind of distortion. But I mean, I've listened with non-oversampling DACs, and they can be really enjoyable to listen with, and it's because some even order harmonic distortion, especially if it's a ladder DAC. So people like that. It can be very, very enjoyable to listen with. Now you've got to remember something that's very, very and extremely important. How is music made? Okay, music is made by causing distortion in the air. Okay, that's what particularly enjoyable distortion. People master craftsmen of things like guitars and violins design stuff so that particular distortion of the air sounded pleasant and harmonious. these things are really, this you've got to think, you're listening to distortion. I mean, let's say you're caring about distortion, and let's say you love rock, you love AC/DC. Well, what is a guitar amp? It's basically a tube circuit turned up with the power turned up so that the tubes distort. The output is distorted. So caring about distortion is kind of really, I mean, if you're listening to like violin and you listen to really, classical and you listen to very high quality recording, then you might care reasonably about this kind of thing. But then knowing what distortion actually makes it sound unpleasant is more useful. And then how many people know that? Just say, oh, it just has these numbers. It's like the numbers don't mean much, next to nothing. You have to remember music itself is a kind of pleasant distortion. And, you know, if you enjoy listening, if you enjoy listening, that's the critical thing. You can't graph minimum enjoyment, maximum enjoyment. You can say, oh, well, if it has more non-harmonic distortion, intermodulation distortion, then it's going to be less pleasant. You can say if it has less, it's going to be more pleasant. There are certain things you can say to a degree. The rest is just, yeah, again, the whole measurement thing is gotten out of hand because I guess it's a natural human desire to say, this is good and this is bad. You want some kind of absolute thing you can say definitively about good and bad. And then putting up a bunch of graphs and measurements, I guess, allows people to do that. And but you know, there are people who buy as I said, non-oversampling DACs, which measure terribly. One of the nicest DACs I had here in its manufacturer ideal mode measured terribly, but it was very, very pleasant to listen with. And actually, it was the difference. It was the DAC in particular. You could hear the difference in how it affected the soundstage. Now, proper soundstage between speakers should be, you know, evenly spread out, and you could hear the depth. It brought everything forward, and I knew that was a kind of distortion from the digital filter, but it was pleasant to listen with, and it was more exciting to listen with, and it was very enjoyable, and it was nicer than the most accurate DAC I have here. In some ways, it was enjoyable. So who's to complain? And then most of the headphones we use anyway have way, way, way higher distortion than this equipment, which has got minus 120 dB distortion measurements. Just people stop caring about it so much. I mean, seriously. Again, wasn't designed. It's like a dyno and dynoing a car. It's not for normal people to care about, except unless they want to care about the max. If they're, you know, like a dyno only measures when people dyno a car to see if to check and measure if the engine is performing correctly or as they want it to. That's all it does. It's like that. If you like distortion, it's not hi-fi. I like rock music. It's hi-fi. It can be hi-fi. I like listening to AC/DC sometimes. So, listening to the message of the artist in a pure way. So, these comments are so funny. Okay, let's be pure. I shall set up plants in my garden and then take off all my clothes. Okay, let's just not go there, right? If you're going to say ridiculous stuff, like talk about that, I'm going to say ridiculous comments too. Here's a thought that really brings up to another level about distortion. Matter is a distortion of space. You are distortion. Yes, you. So we can declare everything is distortion. And again, it's about what you enjoy. So yes, again, it's about what you enjoy. This is the thing. And some people enjoy saying, oh, I have the product with the best measurements. Whatever you enjoy, seriously, that's what it's about. And here's the thing, that your preferences for what the importance of objective factors is subjective as well. So everything is really subjective, including the preference for objectivism. So whether you like it or not, it's true. So I'm going to go off now, and I hope you enjoyed a little chat. But just remember, the hobby is about enjoyment. Don't get so hung up on it about stuff, measurements or whatever, or reviewers or whoever. Just enjoy it, and you know, it can be a fun hobby. And I think the thing that's the most enjoyable is the people, getting involved with people. I mean, the equipment is just kind of secondary. And met a lot of people, manufacturers and other enthusiasts, and that's where the real fun is. And it's can be a lot of fun, and enjoy it that way, and don't take it too seriously.